Great disasters, terrorist attacks, decimating fires, tsunamis, assassinations, devastating world wars, nuclear calamities, rise of technology, global warming, apocalyptic weather. These are just a few of the catastrophes that world-famous prophets have predicted even hundreds of years ago. But what does the future have in store for mankind? Will more of these prophecies be fulfilled during our times? In the darkness of the past, hidden amidst the veils of time, lie whispers of a mysterious force that transcends the boundaries of reality. It is a force that has captivated the human imagination for centuries, combining fear and fascination in equal measure. As we unlock the secrets of the past, could we unlock the key to our future? Or will we be forever bound by the unpredictable twists of destiny? Throughout history, woven amidst the threads of belief, lies a phenomenon that has both intrigued and confused generations.
In my opinion, we've never had a future. We are always repeating our past and calling it the future. This syndrome of misery. And this is what prophecy is trying to break, this rut that we're in of misery and war. Because if we don't look at how we're programmed to be mediocre, to be machines, we will have a third world war, a fourth world war, ad infinitum. If there are not many prophecies in the 21st century, it may be at last that we've encountered what makes us so predictable and we stop it. A genius is not a predictable person. A spontaneous person is not a predictable person. If we start changing the way we educate each new generation and make them, rather than carbon copies of ourselves, people who will learn our lessons and our mistakes and transcend us, then prophecy will end. There will not be prophecies in the future because people will be too unpredictable.
From the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia to the modern era, prophecies have captivated the human imagination, stirring emotions of wonder, fear, and hope. Prophecies, the foretelling of future events, have manifested in various forms across cultures and continents. They've been spoken by revered oracles, encoded in ancient texts, whispered through the visions of seers, and even revealed through the enigmatic workings of the human mind. For centuries, these glimpses into the unknown have made mankind contemplate the nature of fate, the possibility of glimpsing what lies beyond the veil of time.
It's not done to fulfill pessimistic futures. It's done to bring up the wounds or bring up the issues that cause our wars, our plagues, our stupidities, to make us so predictable, and to help us by writing them down, make us more unpredictable.
From the biblical predictions of Nostradamus to the legends of the Delphic Oracle and the Mayan calendar, prophecies have shaped our perception of the world, shaping the course of empires, wars, and even personal destinies. But what lies at the heart of these prophetic insights? Are they mere coincidences, the product of imaginations and human desires? Or do they hold a deeper truth, a connection to the cosmic forces that govern our existence?
The way I understand prophecy, and the way I understand Nostradamus' prophecies, is they are warnings. He called his prophecies my threats. Now, they're mostly pessimistic, but that is, I attribute to him being a 16th century mind. A 16th century mind likes to scare people into doing the right thing. A lot of prophetic traditions don't do that, but he does it. His whole idea is, I'm like someone who's walked before you and you follow my footprints through time and avoid the dark and prodigious events of the future that I'm describing. Certainly, a majority of his prophecies are open to interpretation, but the very fact that there are these few spikes in his obscurity of clarity running through all of his prophecies, that it tells me that he's saying, yes, I'm obscure, but it isn't just a ruse. I've coded this. I've obscured it for a reason. It's for us to find out what that reason is. And equally, it's for us to see what we project upon the mirror of his obscurity. Every generation has different things to say about most of the prophecies. That doesn't rule out that some of them are right, but it certainly tells us what we're thinking about concerning our future. And that, I think, is his occult mission rather than his prophetic mission. You could call it his mystical mission, is to create a document that would keep people, every generation for centuries to come, debating about the future and how they create it today. He is a poet. Poetry is in the twilight zone between the subjective and objective. This is where we meet Nostradamus' works. In the 16th century, it was a time of transition, great superstition, and yet the Renaissance was in full swing, and new ideas were coming. It was a time of great filth. You were considered a clean person if you bathed once a year. In fact, you were considered too clean. Many people didn't bathe for 10 years, including the high-class people, just a little more perfume. However, Nostradamus had very advanced ideas about hygiene. He believed in fresh water, that people should be clean all the time. Apparently, he bathed often, daily, which was considered quite strange.
In December of 1502, in the town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, a child with an incredible gift was born. This child would grow up to become one of the most known prophets in history.
Nostradamus was a 16th century doctor. He would be known as a great healer. He almost single-handedly healed 3 cities of the plague.
Nostradamus started his medical practice around the 1530s in Agen, despite having been expelled from medical school. After going through the tragedy of losing his wife and both his children in an outbreak of the plague, Nostradamus moved to Salon, where he became renowned for his innovative medical treatments against the plague.
His main idea was to help the body get strong enough to fight its own problems.
He came up with a special rose pill that he claimed would help with the treatment of the plague during outbreaks.
However, they're really more like breath mints, and it was more a psychological trick. One thing even the skeptics can't deny Nostradamus is he must have had a legendary bedside manner, because psychologically he was able to help his patients. Except for the pills, the other thing that probably helped his patients was his belief that you have to have clean water, that the patients should be in clean bedding and clean clothes with moderate exercise, that they're not bled. And when he'd come into a city, he would say to the city fathers, clear all the corpses out of this town, or burn them outside of town. So he had an idea that something in the air was causing the disease.
After his life got marked by tragedy, he slowly began moving away from medicine and turning to the occult.
But in the same way, when he used magic, when he used techniques to conjure the visions, he was also a Renaissance man. He used all kinds of occult techniques, Kabbalah, magic leaden mirrors, polished lead that you look into so reflective that you can see images through a candlelight. He used hydromancy extensively. That's where you look into a bowl of water after doing certain incantations. And when you're looking, it is said that the wavelets begin to flow from the center and a vibration comes out of the bowl. And at times one hears a piping little voice that starts explaining the images that cloud out of the depths of the water, images of tomorrow.
Across the span of time, Nostradamus penned his predictions, a tapestry of rhymed quatrains known as centuries.
He has cloaked his work, over 1,400 predictions, in a language that keeps people trying to figure out what he's really about.
This book was composed of rhymed quatrains grouped in hundreds, each a set of 100. Their cryptic style and elusive nature stirred controversy, provoking vehement debates about their validity.
When I view Nostradamus' work, and I've now been doing it for 23 years, it is, on the one hand, so obscure and wild that it can be anything that anybody wants to make out of it. And yet, just when you want to throw the book away and walk away, he'll suddenly get clear and he'll come out and he'll name names, dates, intimate details of history that only someone who had visualized this in a prophecy could see.
Within these verses, echoes of events that shaped history, revolutions, the rise of despots, the advent of technology, and the spectre of terrorism resonate, leaving many in awe of Nostradamus' prophetic prowess.
He also had a lot of planets in detriment. That means he had a tough time in his inner life. Oftentimes mystics, if you look at their astrology, they have really what you would call really nasty charts. In a way, they have so much friction in their inner life that they are challenged every moment to look beyond what most of us just accept as banal, normal life. The divine discontent sometimes is bred from misfortunes or difficult psychological issues, and he had them.
Nostradamus tapped into the pulse of cataclysmic events. His visions were painting the haunting portrait of a future marked by catastrophe. The echoes of his warnings, from plagues to earthquakes, wars to floods, have sent shivers down the spines of those who believed their foretelling powers were real.
And he said, I've consciously written my works in a wild poetry, obscure poetry that's more emotional than rhyme and meter. And a lot of people wonder, well, why? Why be so obscure? Well, one simple reason is, since the inquisitors were always looking over his shoulder, he had to coax it that way. And the other reason is that if it's obscure enough that you can't completely understand where he's at, you keep talking about him, which means that whether each generation gets it right or wrong about his interpretation of his predictions, people for 4 centuries now are still talking about him. He is a hot controversy for 4 centuries. There are very few historical figures, and many who are far greater than this man, who can say there's still a hot controversy. So his device has been extremely successful in keeping us thinking about the future. Over 3 centuries after he penned these prophecies, he talked about a man who was more of the military fire than of the royal blood, who would be born near Italy, and his name would be Napoleone, or Napoleon. This was, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was born near Italy, in the island of Corsica. He talks about his disaster in Russia, that they would die in the White Country, his men. And he also describes his final defeat in the Battle of Waterloo. By a strange riddle, he describes that to the victor will be seen eagles playing with the sun. The very moment that Napoleon's final attack crested the ridge, the Duke of Wellington, sitting on his horse behind his musketeers, saw the French eagle standards as they were rising over the sunset, playing with the sun, before the volley that shattered the attack and shattered Napoleon's hopes for victory. Now, Napoleon was one of 3 men of evil that Nostradamus speaks of, 3 antichrists. Napoleon is one. Another one, he says, will be born in Noricum, an ancient name for Austria. He will be called Hister. Interestingly enough, the man Hister was born on the shores of the Danube River. He was actually born near there, but he grew up on the Danube. The ancient name for the Danube is Hister. A lot of skeptics like to say, well, then he's only talking about the river. But it's clear if you study the Old French, he's talking about a man, and he's using his classic double pun. Hister the river, Hitler the man. He also calls him Wolf a lot. The old Middle German word for Adolf, Adolphus. Hitler used to like to call himself Wolf. That was his nickname.
Austria, 1889. Born into a devout Roman Catholic family, Adolf Hitler had a troubled childhood. An intelligent boy with no interest in school, Hitler was a disappointment to his father, who became increasingly violent. Indoctrinated within his childhood home from an early age, Hitler's father would beat him to enforce the ideals that strength and brutality mean domination, a belief Hitler himself encouraged later on in life.
This passion for conquest reached its hysterical climax when Adolf Hitler enthroned himself as God and the German Führer.
From the deepest part of Western Europe, a young child will be born to poor people, who by his speech will seduce a great multitude. His reputation will increase in the kingdom of the East. The Japanese were very enamored with Hitler, joined his Axis forces. He talked about him being the man of the watch and sign of the crooked iron cross. The Hakenkreuz is what Germans called the crooked cross of the swastika. Nostradamus called him the captain of Greater Germany. Hitler called himself the captain of Greater Germany. He describes the treaties broken in that captain's Great War as the years 37, 41, 42, and 45. That's 1937, 1941, 42, and 45. It's World War II. He describes the people being thrown into the furnace, the Holocaust. He describes the island besieged from air and sea, the British Isles, the Battle of Britain. He also describes Nostradamus as Barb or Barbarossa in certain prophecies. Hitler codenamed his ultimate gamble, the invasion of Russia, his Armageddon in the steppes, if you will, Operation Barbarossa. He fulfilled it as being one of the three men of evil that take us 3 steps towards doomsday. There's a good argument for Nostradamus being obscure if you study how he was used during World War II. Just when the war started, Frau Goebbels, the wife of the propaganda minister, made her husband aware that Hister is probably your boss, is Adolf Hitler. And in Goebbels' diaries, there's many entries about Nostradamus, and he's saying, well, I don't really believe in this stuff, but I can see how the French do, and I'm going to use this against them because we're going to attack France. So he created leaflets and had them dumped over the French lines, saying, your countryman, Nostradamus, saw your defeat. Now, what makes this powerful to me is that he did actually see the defeat. Nostradamus talks about the route of the invasion as being the Ardennes forest. He talked about how the French would build a huge ditch fortress on their eastern frontier that would fail because of the Ardennes invasion. Nostradamus saw the Maginot Line, and from 4 centuries back, what he was warning his future countrymen, don't do this. The invasion's coming this way. Of course, he wasn't heeded.
Once more, the Germans were to stand on the very threshold of victory and still fail.
Nostradamus was a Jew, a Christianized Jew, and there seems to be references to the future of Jewry in the world, and one of them, several of them, is about the final solution. The shocking and infamous armed one will fear the great furnace, or the great oven. First the chosen one of the Jews, the captives not returning. You can imagine almost Nostradamus seeing the trains, with the Jews getting on the trains but not returning. It says, the world's lowest crime, the angry female, Lady Israel, he says, not at ease. Israel, which was created after the Holocaust, is still afraid and armed and ready for a second Holocaust. Then he uses one of Hitler's nicknames, Barbarossa, Hitler, Malta, and the empty soulless one does not return. The empty soulless one, if you've ever seen pictures of Adolf Hitler in the final days when he was reviewing Hitler Youth, you see him as a totally spent, spiritually spent man. He died already before he committed suicide. And it seems, with the reference here, that Nostradamus saw that. The empty, soulless one does not return. We may hope that there will not be another Hitler and another Holocaust. Not only did Nostradamus see Hitler, but he also talked about his fascist soulmate, Mussolini. He called him Duce. As the crowd used to yell, Duce, Duce, called him Deuce. He also predicted his death. He said, Duce will lose his eyes in an iron cage in Milan. In April 1945, the body of Mussolini was strung up on a burned-out iron cage of a gas station in Milan. And his body was pulverized, and his face was beaten to a bloody pulp. One could poetically see the connection. Duce loses his eyes.
Nostradamus spoke about the idea of the three antichrists in history. Two of these turned out to be real: Napoleon Bonaparte embodying the idea of the first Antichrist, and Adolf Hitler being considered the second. But the third Antichrist is thought to be coming, not necessarily in the shape of a human.
Now, there's a third Antichrist, and it's not so clear who he is. He could even be a thing rather than a man. One of his enigmatic names could be Mabus, M-A-B-U-S. Nostradamus has a problem with our modern technologies. He sometimes wonders if the machines and the missiles and the planes he's seeing are animals or living creatures of some kind. When the animal is tamed by man, after great efforts and difficulty, it begins to speak. The lightning so harmful to the rod will be taken from the earth and suspended in the air. I mean, this is the description of at least power lines, and suspending in the air could even take it the next step to microwaves and telecommunications. The beast that's so harmful to the rod that takes lightning, is electricity. And often with Nostradamus, he talks about technology as beasts and animals. There's the hungry eye of the dog that's watching the besieged island. Try to find any inference to dogs in history. Well, if you study any of the great sieges of Britain, World War I, World War II, siege by submarine, what did the Germans call their packs of submarines? Wolf packs, dogs. He's describing the periscope, the eye of the hungry dog, hungry for victory.
It was one of the darkest days in American history and the most horrifying public events of the 20th century. Decades later, Kennedy's assassination is still a global mystery that affects the world to this date.
History often repeats itself. Some people would compare Jean Dixon in her own time, in our times, to Nostradamus in his time for being someone who forewarned of a major event. And there is a possibility that Nostradamus even saw Jean Dixon attempting to end the destiny she had foreseen.
At noon, I was having lunch at the Mayflower Hotel with friends who asked me why I was so quiet and not eating. My answer was, the president is going to be shot. My heart stood still when the orchestra leader came over to our table and said, someone has just taken a shot at the president.
Here's how the prophecy goes. The great man will be struck down in the day by a thunderbolt. The evil deed predicted by the bearer of a petition. You got to remember that Gene Dixon, as the prophecy came closer to fulfillment, actually tried to contact Jack Kennedy through friends in the White House and tell him not to go to Dallas. And she, perhaps, is this bearer of the petition. As the prophecy goes on, it says, according to the prediction, another falls at nighttime. Now, Jack Kennedy was killed just after 1 o'clock in the broad daylight. His brother died at 1 in the morning, in the middle of the night.
It seems like some of the prophets knew a president would have this fate written in the stars, even though they lived hundreds of years ago.
He had made a prediction, like Gene Dixon, that was documented. A lot of people knew about it. In his case, it was predicting the king's death in a jousting accident. In Gene Dixon's case, it was the assassination of Kennedy. In both ways, the deaths in their different times changed the course of history. And when Nostradamus was fulfilled in his prophecy, he became the talk of the courts of Europe. And this is where his fame began. The prophecy of the death of Henry II was written or published in May of 1555. The death took place in late June, early July of 1559. The day the king died, a crowd gathered in front of the offices of the Inquisition, demanding that they burn Nostradamus at the stake. The cardinals faced the crowd. They had effigies of Nostradamus set on fire. Fortunately for Nostradamus, though threatened by the Inquisition a few times, he had the luck to have a very powerful friend in one woman who perhaps was even his disciple, and that was Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France, who, coming from Florence and coming from the Medici family, the family was famous and noted for its love of la fortuna, fortune, fate. So she was always there to protect him. And fortunately, when the king died, he was hundreds of miles south in his town of Salon, Provence. So he wasn't there to see the mobs that came to the inquisitor's offices the night of the king's death, demanding that Nostradamus be burned. And they were burning him in effigy in the crowd in front of the cardinals. And of course, it didn't happen.
Nostradamus predicted the Kennedy curse as well as the assassination of JFK. He talked about 3 brothers who would later be confirmed to be the Kennedy brothers by experts of prophetic readings.
It's a very famous interpretation. Several of modern interpreters, including myself, have entertained the possibility that Nostradamus was speaking of the 3 Kennedy brothers. But it's important also to acknowledge that he may have been speaking of the 3 Guise brothers of his own time, who were kind of like the Kennedys of their own time, very ambitious, wanting to be king. They all meant terrible ends. So, with that said, though, if it is about the 3 Kennedy brothers, it's important to understand that Ted or Edward Kennedy is not a part of this prophecy. A lot of people think he's the 3rd Kennedy who's somehow going to die of some assassination attempt or something. It's not going to happen. The 3 brothers who were destroyed by the Antichrist, forces of the Antichrist, have already been destroyed. Joe Jr. was killed in World War II when his bomber exploded in midair. Jack Kennedy was killed in Dallas, and Robert Kennedy was killed in California in 1968. So basically, the prophecy has been fulfilled.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
I often get asked the question, is there any prophecies about extraterrestrials in Nostradamus? There may be, but what's more clear, there are predictions more in Nostradamus than anyone else, actually, about man's destiny in the stars. There are predictions that we will leave this earth because the earth will be destroyed when the sun expands and burns it up. But that long before that happened, the races of man will have left the planet and colonized stars in the constellations of Aquarius and Cancer. There are some references to monsters and fantastic creatures, which may not be machines, but may actually be descriptions of man's first contact with alien civilizations. Certainly, he talks about gods making it seem to man that they are the authors of a great war. Now, that could be a poetic allusion to gods being the great noble kings of his time, or it could be taken more literally as gods, extraterrestrials, who might be the authors of some of our wars.
New York City. At the city's heart, Manhattan, densely populated and among the world's major cultural, commercial, and financial centers. With over 8 million people living in New York City, 1 in every 38 people in the United States call this city home.
Nostradamus talks about great cities of crystal in a swamp, which, if you were in Staten Island in the marshes, looking off across the marshes to New York City, and you were from the 16th century, wouldn't it look like big crystals in a swamp, all those skyscrapers with their glittering lights? It seems that the World Trade Center was foreseen. He talks about the Garden of the World. There's only a few places in the world that have a name close to that. The Garden State, across the Hudson River from New York. Garden of the World, he says. A city that would be hit by a great fire or a great flood of poisonous waters. He talks about a place of hollow mountains. The hollow mountains shall fall. Nostradamus and other prophets see very little after the year 2000. Except for a few prophecies, it's empty. Whereas before it was full of predictions. The way I see that is either we follow our predictability to our own destruction, or humanity encounters what makes prophecy work, what makes us so predictable. We become more ingenious. We become less conditioned, less mediocre. Our society starts to help nurture our genius, our spontaneity. One of the biggest conspiracies in history of prophecy has been this cockamamie idea that prophecy is written in stone, that there is fate. And obviously the people that say that have an agenda, and they don't study the prophets very deeply. Nostradamus clearly says in many places in his prophecies that the future is fluid, that it's changeable. And anybody with intelligence can see that's true. Because if it's rigid and written in stone, why warn anyone? Why warn anybody about the beginning of an anti-Christian war? If it's fate, why hurt people and harm people by telling them how they're going to die? No, that's not what prophecy is about. It's about warning you so that you wake up and start doing things intelligently.
From the North Pole to the South Pole, the planet is warming. Global average surface temperatures have risen by more than 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 0.9 degrees Celsius, since 1906, even more in polar regions. The effects of rising temperatures are already evident. They aren't waiting for some far-off future. The heat is melting glaciers and sea ice, changing precipitation patterns and causing animals to migrate. In addition to rising temperatures, climate change impacts include extreme weather events, shifting wildlife populations and habitats, rising sea levels, and more. Nostradamus predicted the appearance of holes in the ozone layer using cryptic language in multiple of his quatrains. Although people at the time didn't know what those meant, interpreters in more recent years have managed to make the connection and decipher most of the quatrains that Nostradamus wrote.
It seems like humanity can only wake up when it's suffering. When we have it going well, we fall asleep. We're a very sleepy species. So in a way, it may be that we have to get whacked over the head to go, hey, I can't be nationalistic anymore. And these prophets are definitely whacking us over the head with global warming prophecies, floods on the sea coasts. Many prophets talk about that. It's the rising oceans. Isaiah and Ezekiel talk often about how there's fire coming from the skies. Up to the point of the Cold War, we thought that was nuclear fires. But now with the Cold War being over, we can take a fresh look at all the different prophecies and realize that it can equally be the heating of the atmosphere. There are prophets that have warned that they'll make pencil planes that will punch holes in the atmosphere and let in lethal radiation, kill tens of millions. It's ozone holes. It's like we're getting the warnings and we can fix it. The choice is each individual's. The way we look at things is it's not my 5 pounds of trash that's causing the world to go down the tubes. It's my neighbors. It's the guy overseas. One mystic, Krishnamurti, as well as a mystic named Osho in our times, used to say, you are the world. You are responsible. If you want freedom, you have to also equally be responsible for it. Freedom is not licentiousness. There are many references to the storms, and there are many references to a flood on Earth. And usually before we were aware of global warming, people thought the flood must be tidal waves from earthquakes. But if you actually study the native words of each prophecy, the words don't mostly say tidal waves. They just simply say flood, rising water. That would be a fulfilled prophecy. Definitely a prophecy we need to prevent. You know, when I ask people how they define the word apocalypse, the vast majority of them say, oh, doom and gloom, end of all my dreams, fire and brimstone, destruction of civilization, Armageddon. You know, that's not what the word means. Apocalypse is an ancient Greek word for revealing what is true. It is the word for enlightenment. How interesting it is that a word that is one of the most beautiful words in any ancient language should become this word of doom and gloom. Perhaps it says something, though, about us. We are more interested in preserving our illusions, and if we are, then apocalypse is doom and gloom if we want to live with our lies and sustain them. But if the people in the future want to drop their lies and their fossilized traditions and their dogmatic religions, they will view apocalypse as enlightenment, as the birth of a new humanity that will know no war. Nostradamus' last prediction concerns his own death. He speaks of coming back from a mission to the embassy. At the time, he was an emissary of the king at the Parliament of Arles, and suffered a serious attack of gout and dropsy, which is probably pulmonary edema, kidney failure. And he asked to have his bed moved to his secret study at the top of the house. The night of his death, he apparently was in great pain, but he was very serene. He had already known for years the day of his death, he said, and he told his disciple, Chauvigny, said, "You will not see me at sunrise." And of course, sunrise the next morning, July 2nd, 1566, he crept up the staircase and opened the door to see how he was. And they found him just as he had predicted a few years before. He said, "You will find him dead between the bed and the bench." He was found lying in his bed with his gout-ridden leg on the bench, so half off the bed and half on the bench. You will find him between the bed and the bench.
From ancient oracles of the past to modern-day predictions, the web of prophecy spans cultures, continents, and eras, all bound together by the timeless question, can we truly predict the future, or are these mere coincidences and interpretations? We may never have an answer.